time. And in about 1 minute, I will call a meeting to order. So
Okay, the live stream has started.
all right. I'd like to call a meeting to order of the CR&T committee, August 10th, 4:45 on 2020. Call a roll, please. Julie?
Do you want me to call it or just reflect that all members are present?
Reflect, please.
Okay, I have that all members are present.
And welcome to our other visitors. It's always a pleasure to have the rest of you on here too. And today, as you know, as we're going through this, I'll have some special announcements. But first, I'd like you to, if you've had a chance to read the minutes from our July meeting, and if you've had a chance to look at those, I hope you have. Are there any corrections or additions, or otherwise I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes for July 13th.
Jim Zahn's moving to approve the minutes.
Tom Quinn seconds.
Okay, moved by Jim Zahn. Tom Quinn seconded. Any discussion, questions? If not, all approved, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. Before I get into the agenda, remember today we're going to do three basic things. We're going to talk about the extension here and their budget. And what I'm going to do is after the report from our area extension, we're going to go right down to on the agenda 5E and 6C. That means we're going to follow up after the report of each one of you, doing the actual going into the budget discussion, and then if there's any action. So Catherine, that we will take care of that right after you give your first report. After that, I will follow the same format with your approval that when we hear from the Dunn County Economic Development Corporation, Stacy, I will follow that up with going right into the budget consideration on that, which is 6A, and then recommended to the county board regarding economic development funding. And then we will go down to the actual budget request under 6A. So then we're going to follow up on the broadband, and that will be the way we go. Regarding rural tourism, Jim Zahn's, we have a little bit, you'll notice in the minutes from the last meeting, there was some recommendation in there, and then we'll finish up with any legislative action that we're going to recommend from here. Remember last year, our legislative action, I went back and looked, was that we increased broadband funding in the rural area. So that's our agenda. If that's okay with everybody, without objection, we will move ahead. Now, we will be calling on our county manager and our county board chair, Dave Bartlett, for their comments and recommendations when we get into all of these issues as well. Because as county board committee, I think it's important that all of us hear what they have to say as well, and then be able to reflect it when they take it on or goes on to executive and finally to the full county board. So are there any questions before we start on this, how our format and how we're going to proceed? I do have a question, and I'll apologize right ahead of time. Stacy and I did put together a budget for the Dunn County EDC, and then I heard from Ann some time ago that she didn't get it, and I thought I had forwarded that to you. And I went back and looked in my minutes thinking all of you had it, and then Paul said he didn't see it. And Stacy, I don't know what happened. It was my error. Then I sent one out again later this afternoon. So I'm sorry. I thought we had it sent out to you. So Stacy, when it gets to be the report and that, you might have to go in some things. Did some of you catch my last report as late as 2 o'clock this afternoon with that in there? Well, Stacy, so knowing that, then we're gonna have to maybe spend more time on that budget. Okay, we're gonna start out. Catherine Emmanuel. Catherine and I had a nice discussion the other day, and I said, Catherine, go with it. Take all the time you want, because we talked quite a bit about the community development position and a lot of other things. Catherine, we're going to call on you at this time for the for your area extension director's report, and then we're going to follow up with 5E under here talking about the budget, and then any action. Okay, go ahead, Catherine.
Catherine just needs one moment. Her audio just cut out. She's just connecting real quick.
Sure. Can't hear you, Catherine. We cannot hear you, Catherine. Now you're on. Now
Now,
you're on. Right. Go.
you're off of my headset. Let me turn off the fan behind me. Oh, technology. You love it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for that. So I believe where we're at right now is to have me do the area extension director report. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So I'll keep it pretty brief because I know we'll spend a more significant time talking about the extension department when we review the budget. What I wanted to share is just some highlights from our monthly highlights that we share out. A couple of things. I think first and foremost is to please double and triple check that you have Tuesday, September 1st on your calendars from 1 to 2:30. We are having our third Area 6, which is the Tri-Counties meet and greet. That will be on Tuesday, September 1st. And our staff are working really hard to put together an agenda that's highlighting the ways in which Extension is working together while we're apart, and a significant amount of the COVID response with agriculture educators to our food-wise educators, 4-H, our human development and relationships. So all of the work that we're doing in Extension really highlighting how are we moving forward. The second is just to just share out with you that there has been a large amount of discussions around the budget with the state. And the short story is I do not have any updates for you on how that may or may not impact Extension, but I do want to acknowledge that those conversations are going on. And I really do not have a crystal ball of what I could see there. What I can tell you is that Extension has been partaking in furlough days across all UW-Madison. So our faculty, academic staff, food-wise educators, and myself, we are all taking furlough days between May and end of October. I do not know if the furloughs will continue. However, we are on our course right now to complete, depending on salary levels, between 3 to 6 furlough days between then and now. And then just wanted to highlight just some nice work that's not in the monthly report that Katie Wantock is working on. She is currently working on a survey that's going to be going out to local farmers in Dunn County on what type of programming would be most meaningful to them, in addition to the work that she's already doing to really try to respond and wrap around educationally the supports that farmers could use during this time. So she anticipates that that survey will be complete in about a month or so, maybe towards the end of September. And then she'll be using that data to create programming December. And then she normally does a large programming in January. So of course, not knowing how COVID is going to behave between now and December, now in January, she'll continue to be nimble and adaptable, but want you to know that the direct outreach with local farmers is happening to make sure that we are providing the education and resources for farmers that they can most use right now.
Catherine, I thank you. I saw some article in the Country Today about what you were just talking about, how Extension is reaching out to and to the COVID-19. I don't know if everybody gets a Country Today. I do. That's kind of an agriculture newspaper, but a lot of it is in the Eau Claire Leader paper too, if you do get it. So that was great. Thank you. Well, Catherine, and if it's all right with you, I would like to reach out right now and follow up right now with Extension with Keith here and with Paul and with David Bartlett. So we're going to go right to 5E on your agenda. 5E is the fiscal 2021 budget extension year. Now, what do we need to report here at this point for you, Keith and Catherine?
Well, in essence, from my perspective, this would be the opportunity for the standing committee to review the budget request submitted by the UW Extension. Certainly, Catherine could hit the highlights of what's included in the request. And certainly, we're here to address any questions you may have.
Yes, thank you.
And then again,
Keith.
at the end, we're also looking for your recommendation moving
Right.
forward.
That will be under 6C for the budget if we want to take any action. So, so between Keith and Catherine now, can that lead us right into the budget at this point? Catherine?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Michelle too, jump in.
Thank you. And I want to thank Michelle and Keith and the county manager's office for just helping us get to this conversation. Michelle's position helps out significantly with the budget. So she's very attuned and probably has a better handle on more of the minute details in the budget. So please consider us a team, and we worked on this together to present this. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll start off with kind of the one-page narrative that was provided in your packet. And really the oversight for our budget, I want to kind of think about 4 main things. And I'll kind of go between that packet of information and then the information that was in the CRTC budget. So knowing that we haven't had a couple of years together, let alone a couple of months together in person, I tried to boil down really how I think about the extension budget. And while you will see lots and lots of lines on your report, and we're happy to answer any questions about that, what I wanted to share is around kind of the 4 main categories that I see the extension budget in. So the first bucket, or the first category, is a support specialist. And that is 1.0 FTE. That includes salary, benefits, all of that. The second main category is around the contracted services for educators. So what Dunn County has bought into or invested into between last year, this year, is 3.58 full-time equivalent educational services. So for those who used to be around in Extension, and I think you used to work in Extension, and anybody else who used to be on the Extension committee, counties used to buy into an educator, like a point blank an educator. And the contract changed a couple of years ago where counties are now investing into educational services. So while you think about, the faces that you see, really what you're investing in is those educational services. So I'll highlight those. It's educational services for the agriculture educator at 1.0 FTE for human development and relationships educator, 1.0 FTE 4-H program educator, and then 2 shared positions. And one is around horticulture, and that's at 0.25, and that's shared with Chippewa, Dunn, Eau Claire, and Polk counties. And the last is a community development educator. So if you put all of those together, that's how you get to your 3.58 educators.
Right.
Now, what's not in your budget that I do think is a significant part of the value of extension is that you have 4 educators who come and teach with FoodWise. So one is Sandy Tartar, that many of you do know, who's been in Dunn County for many years. She's a coordinator and she supervises 3 educators across the 3 counties. And the 4 of them do programming and teaching in Dunn County around nutritional education. And a lot of that is driven income needs, needs-based education for people who are experiencing poverty, whether it's school-age kids up to senior citizens, moms who are at the WIC clinic. So there's a real lifespan of the folks that they serve. And Dunn County does not invest in those positions per se. What Dunn County has invested in is really the office space, some materials, but really the state and the federal government cover that through a grant. So their salaries are covered by a grant, mileage, most of their supplies are covered by that grant. But I think it's important that I acknowledge the full team when we look at this 3.58 FTE, that while we're not asking for money for that, that is a part of the value of extension. And then you have the service of one area extension director, and that's myself, and I'm 100% state funded. So the county co-invests into the services for the 3.58 educators. This year, as you see in your one-page budget narrative, there is an increase in the contracted fee. The fee has not been increased for the last couple of years, and this year across the state, the fee has gone up 2%. And so when Michelle and I looked at that 2%, it's really increasing $2,970. There is a $10,000 discount that was introduced a few years ago, and that discount is still being applied because Dunn County has invested into at least one educator across the county. So there's also professional development funds for each educator that's tied into that contract. And so that is really for each educator, it's $42,330. And then that's kind of prorated if you have a lower investment. So if you have 25% investment or 33% investment into a position. And then taking all of that consideration, it actually adds up to an increase of 2.12%. So again, the contracted services line overall is 2.12, and there's a 2% increase on the fees for the educator. Another thing that we look at in the budget, if we kind of move now to the different buckets, is materials and supplies for operations. That's where you're going to see a lot of the lines in there, whether that's phones, printing, IT, mileage, program supplies, professional development, etc. So for IT, the department is needing to figure out where we budget out the IT expenses. And what we are proposing is that we would do computer replacement costs over 2 years. And we have found a way that we can meet the needs of the educators without really having a significant impact to our budget. And so we would prefer to go that route. And Michelle has gotten guidance that if it's approved at the committee level and the full county board, that's the way we would proceed, is to take 2 years for that acquisition. And then the fourth category is external funding. So sometimes educators have an opportunity to bring in non-levy dollars through fundraising. You'll see a lot of that happen with 4-H and the agriculture educator program. There's also times where we receive grants, whether it's $5,000, maybe it's a little lower, maybe it's higher. Sometimes the grant can be for a program. Sometimes the grant could be to bring on an intern. And so we have put in there to increase the dollar amount by about $10,000. The reason why is really twofold. One, let's have some hope in this world a little bit. And so one is that we will still see the opportunities, which we think will still be there. But two, if we adopt this earlier in the budget process, then it saves us really the legislative and procedural work later on in the budget year to go back and go through all of the committees to adjust for, let's say, $2,000. So we try to do that increase, anticipating very optimistically that maybe we'll get an intern next year through a grant, or maybe one of the educators will receive some grant funding for a program. But it's also possible that we don't receive that money. And so if we don't, it's not levy dollars. It's there isn't a return to the county because the money would not be spent. It's really being optimistic and hoping that making room for possibilities. I guess that's a good way to put it.
Yes.
And then, so those are really the four categories. So thinking about county support staff, the educational contract that you co-invest into, materials and supplies for operations, and then external funding. The last, before we talk a little bit more about the community educator, is really depending on how COVID acts in 2021, it's possible that we're budgeting for this and that we'll be significantly under budget. So this year we anticipate being very under budget, mileage, supplies. The expenses are very minimal aside from the educational services. So I want to be transparent with you that it is possible that we budget for it, and I think it would be maybe bittersweet welcome news that it's under budget. I think we'd also rather be out of COVID. That would be the better news. So before we go on to talk about the community development educator position, I want to pause and see if there's any additional information or questions that I could address.
Well, all of my questions have to do right now with community educators. So unless somebody else has questions, proceed, Catherine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Michelle, have I covered everything? Okay.
Okay.
All righty. So I want to give a little background. So Dunn County has in the past, starting in 2019, co-invested into a community development educator position. And really the way that that happened was when I started in extension as a director, at the time, the county was paying 100% for the 4-H educator position. And I was able to find a window of opportunity to get the state to agree to co-invest in that position. So I don't remember that exact dollar amount, but it was probably somewhere around $70,000 or so for that 4-H educator position, with the county paying for their benefits and everything. And so I was able to move that on to the state contract where the state picked up more of that amount. And then what we did was we were able to make a value proposition to the county to say, well, now we have a significant savings that we have. Would the county like to invest the savings into this community development educator position that would service across 3 counties? So that began in January of 2019. And that continued until about April of 2020. And then the educator took a phenomenal opportunity for himself. He became a statewide specialist in Illinois. So I'm sorry we lost him to Illinois. Very talented person. So in the meantime, COVID has continued and the state has been in a hiring freeze. And so I want to just share with you that I do not have, unfortunately, a good indication of when that hiring freeze would be over. I have no idea if it will be the end of the year, if it will be sometime next year, if it will be the beginning of the year. I honestly do not know. What I do know is I have conferred with the assistant dean in extension, the UW-Madison Division of Extension, to say, okay, so if we have a hiring freeze and we're having some fiscal challenges at the state, how serious are we to filling this position on our side if we receive the funding? Because if we're not in it for the long run. I think we better just talk about that now, just to disclose that so that we don't kind of go down a road that's not really viable. And she has assured me that while they do not automatically refill positions at the state like they used to, that this position is highly valued still in extension in this geographic area. One, there's still a significant need for community development, which we can go over a little bit. There is a strong desire from the state to start taking this area-wide approach so that some educators can work across multiple county lines. And there is a savings to the county, and the state still invests, their portion, but it is then distributed across the 3 counties. So while positions are not automatically refilled at the state, this has been given considerable consideration, and we have strong institutional support to support this position pending the end of the hiring freeze, and of course, pending support that may come from the counties through the 2021 budget process. I can pause there if there are any questions. Otherwise, I can continue with programming.
Catherine, I would like to interject something here. This community educator here in Dunn County, I wondered about the set curriculum, and I asked that because when Joseph was here, the things he did was great. My question is, might we, if that position opens up here in Dunn County, might we be able to, and if we shared it again with Chippewa and Eau Claire County, ask this person to be somewhat of our broadband educator within our area, taking away some of the pressure from Bob Colson and planning and also Dunn County EDC, because then we would have a place through extension that could probably be our go-to place for broadband. Might that be possible if this position was filled?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The answer is yes and no. So extension does not have a broadband educator position anymore. We used to some years ago. Maybe, Ann, when you were in extension, you may have had somebody that served in that role, but we don't have a broadband educator anymore. We have a few broadband specialists who work at the state level who really are subject matter experts in broadband. There's lots of other types of positions that we see that replicated in, but for this situation, we have specialists. The way that counties participate in the broadband educational service is to invest in a community development educator position. So in your packet, there's several pages on what that general scope of that position would be. So there's programming, there's collaboration and relationships, reporting and communication, and I'll kind of highlight the broadband stuff, but I think it's important to lay a foundation if that's okay with you, Chair
Yes.
Anderson. Okay, so what happens is, let's say we have a new educator come in. If you notice on page 12 of your packet, although it says number 2 at the bottom, but it's 12 of your packet, on the third bullet, it says programming, planning, reporting, and communication. And what they have to do is they have to create an annual plan of work that identifies local audiences, describes the programming to meet the local needs, and connects to larger objectives within the Division of Extension, and assess the program effectiveness. So one of the things with this plan of work is the plan of work has significant engagement with local stakeholders and communication with the extension committees to receive feedback to make sure the programming is in alignment with the direction of the counties and in partnership with extension. So the person would come in and in part of their needs assessment would be consulting with the committee to make sure that from the get-go, we're on the right page, we're on the same page. So then the position that the state would like to see again, and it is similar to what was in the past, is a focus on community food systems. And it's more than food. It's really about local economic development, manufacturing, small business startup, doing work with the farmers market, doing work with some of the farm to small market and just going directly there. There's lots and lots of work that can be done in the 3 counties around this area. They're also doing some COVID responses that we could get into if you wish. But where the broadband comes in is that the broadband, the community development educator would have an opportunity to join different work groups once they start their career with Extension.
Okay.
So in this case, there is a brand new statewide work group focused on broadband. And here are the things that the educator and the county would have access to. Broadband initiatives taking place in other parts of the state, broadband policy analysis, policies and practices from other states, and then looking at state and regional partnerships. So thinking about this type of educator, we wouldn't necessarily be looking for somebody who is a broadband expert, but somebody who does have demonstrated experience of how to tap into resources and apply their community development skills to help synthesize the data to help the county make informed decisions and appropriate strategies. So there's some examples of what that looks like of project management, survey development, coordinating listening sessions, etc. And then I listed some examples of how other community development educators, what they have done around this topic in Wisconsin counties. So there's researching and conveying information, setting up meetings that feature guest speakers on the topic. So again, that would be working with our institute and our broadband subject matter experts, helping to establish formal and or informal broadband projects. And I know you can all read very well, so I'll let you read the rest. You probably already have, but really being that connector around projects. I know that Eau Claire County is, their chair is chair of the Extension Committee, Mr. Dunn Mowry, is incredibly interested in the broadband aspect of this position. And their committee has not voted on the budget, but they have shared that they're in strong support. And Chippewa County just voted on the budget last Wednesday and are supporting this. So it's something that is a unique time to be considering, understanding all of the fiscal challenges that everybody is having across the state. And certainly Dunn County is not unfortunately exempt from that. And so you have very difficult decisions. And what I put forward before you is information to the best of my knowledge of the value that Dunn County would be receiving to co-invest into this position, really a third of the expenses, and the value and the connection you would continue to receive from the university if this was a direction that the county went in.
Thank you, Catherine. Very thorough. I appreciate that. We have talked about this. Now I'm gonna talk to you as individual now. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels. Quite a few years ago, we had great help from Stephanie Hintz when we started mapping the county. And Stephanie was along with Dunn County EDC and along with Bob Colson. And at that time, Bob had an assistant. What was his name again? Bob Vang. And they did a fantastic job of mapping where the broadband lack of totally was. And we have that map yet outside your extension office, Michelle. However, we haven't been able to keep it current and updated because there's nobody there who has the time. Now, obviously, when you look at the Dunn EDC budget, you're going to see some money in there for broadband. Jim Zahns, you're going to see some money in there for rural tourism. Keep that in mind. Bob Colson, you know, from broadband and everything, you've done a great job in getting us going. However, we can't expect you to continue that. This is why I brought the topic up to Catherine about if this position were here, how much time could we expect here in Dunn County to get some help with broadband, and you answered that. Thank you. Now, unless somebody else has a particular question on a committee, or to you, Paul or Dave or Keith, about this community development or community educator position, does anybody have any more questions on that? Tom?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the presentation from Kathleen. But I do understand and think that the ability to shape the position to some degree to incorporate support for broadband would be important. But I also don't want to overlook the importance that the other aspect that she laid out, which is the value added agriculture, small scale food products and things like that. That is, in most cases, that's one of the driving factors for rural tourism. If you have a county that fosters that kind of entrepreneurial activity, you have the basis for building a sustainable rural tourism industry. So I think the two work together very well.
Thank you, Tom. I agree. Anybody else on the committee first? Questions of Catherine or Michelle? How about you, Dave Bartlett? Do you have any questions at the no? He says. Well, then if there are no further questions, Catherine, maybe we could move ahead if there action that we want to take, which would be at this point. If somebody wants to, you have I do not have a particular motion that I have prepared or from anybody, but I look at our agenda. We're down here to 6C right now. 2021, that's not 2020, that's 2021 budget for extension. What would be a good motion for us to have there, Catherine?
No, I would defer to maybe the
Keith.
county manager or maybe
Right.
the clerk, somebody who's been doing this with other
Right.
committees to
Yeah, that's
be
what I
uniform.
meant. Thank you. I meant to talk to Keith on that, right? What he needs. Thank you. Or Paul.
Thank you,
What-
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Really, we're looking for a recommendation from this committee about the proposed budget that's in your packet.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Tom,
I'm wondering if, maybe I'm missing it, but if Catherine, you have a breakout of what the cost of the community development position is?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
If you go to, let's see, I know we have lots of documents flying around. So if you go to your one pager that was in your original budget document, let me look at the other one. But essentially it's 33% of 42,330. Michelle, do you
A
have that
third
in
of-
front of you?
a third of 42,000, what is it again?
330. Michelle's got the exact dollar amount
What
for
is
you.
it, 12,000 something, Michelle?
It's a total of $14,133.90 with the fee and the professional development.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody got it? 14,900? I have it too, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That would be all expenses for the county, right?
Correct.
Keith,
And-
did
and-
that answer your question?
The question I have, I guess, for Catherine and Michelle, I don't have all those details with me here. This position that you're talking about, is that included what went out in the packet of your total budget for 246,000? This is just a new detail included in that. Is that correct?
Yep, it's correct because the position was already approved for 2020 and the
Yep.
position has not been removed or the contract hasn't ended from the county. So it still remains and still within that same dollar amount that you see overall.
Thank you for clarifying. That's what I thought was the case. I just didn't
Yeah.
have all that specifically in front of me. Mr. Chair, then, yeah, this would include all aspects of costs related to what they proposed. It's just kind of the nuances and description of the details and the breakdown of it.
And remember this position might not be filled at all in 2021 too, right, Catherine? We don't know that, as you explained.
Well, I think it will be filled. It's
You
just
do.
well, there's two big ifs. There's if we have the support from the counties as a partner to say,
Right.
yes, we're still interested.
Our motion has that, right?
And then the state has emphasized, I asked up ways, down ways, backwards, because it's a lot of work to go through this if the state's just not interested. They are very, very interested. So it really is a matter of when that hiring freeze is lifted. And I would say, I truly don't know when that hiring freeze will be lifted. But let's
We don't.
hypothetically say if it was lifted in January 1st, which I have no idea when it will be.
No, we
I have
know.
to be very clear on that. If
know.
it was lifted January 1st, I think we could expect to see 2 to 3 months for the hiring process between posting it, recruiting, doing interviews, with a start date of probably somewhere around between March and April. So in that case, the county would not be charged during that time. And so that would also be, I don't know if we'd call it a return, but you wouldn't be charged for it. So you would have that
Okay.
really to return back to the county.
So Keith, do we need a dollar amount in this motion that we're going to approve or as posted?
No, it would be as presented. If the committee has amendments, certainly you could act on those as part of your discussion, deliberation, and ultimate whatever action you take today. So, if there's no questions or changes, it could just be simply recommending moving this forward as presented.
Mr. Chair.
Tom Quinn.
So I think that for $14,000, given the fact that this position, and it may be less than that by the time it's filled, if it is filled, given that this position touches two of the priorities, potentially broadband, and certainly provides additional support to our economic development mission, I would support I would move that we support the budget as presented.
You've heard the motion. Do I hear a second? Moved by Tom Quinn and seconded by Ann. Thank you. Any more discussion on the motion as presented? Hearing four more, I will ask for a vote. We'll vote by acclamation, but to make sure I see everybody, and that Julie does. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine and Michelle, for your presentation, and we will forward that on then to the executive and the next committee. So Keith, thank you, and we've got that taken care of. Oh, that takes care of extension. You're welcome to stay on, Catherine and Michelle, but we're going to move on right now then and keep the agenda moving. So at this point, I'm backing up to item 5A, which is Dunn County Economic Development Corporation. And we have here our interim executive director, Stacy Wigfield, who is going to give us a little highlights of what's going on. Then we'll jump right down to the budget for Dunn County EDC and talking about and then finally, if we want to take any action. So Stacy, your report.
All right, I feel kind of bad. These reports seem to be redundant, but what it really means is the ongoing business of the Economic Development Corporation is ongoing. And although it strikes me that it's slowed down a little bit since its latest spike, but excuse me, there's still been plenty going on. I continue to attend and report at various board meetings like Momentum West, the Greater Menominee Development Corporation Board, the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and I just was able to join a new group, the Greater St. Croix Valley Partners. Always good to hear what's going on right next to us from other counties. Some good news, some bad news, some things happening in some places and not in others. Still lots of webinars going on out there, as was mentioned earlier, webinars on broadband and lots of meetings and webinars on funding and grants and loans from the Small Business Administration, the Wisconsin Economic Development Association, Wisconsin Economic Development Corp. And Focus Forward live streams from Missy. Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. I listen in on a regional leadership council that's called the CEO Leadership Series. Chambers of Commerce are putting out quite a bit of stuff. Interact with the Golden Shovel Agency on a monthly basis. Excuse me, been listening into Star and Tribune out of Minneapolis, St. Paul puts out some very interesting short half-hour webinars out there. Continue listening to WISI. Tech Soup has some nice webinars. And just last Tuesday, listened in on the town hall that most or all of you might have been on. It focused on return to schools, be it the elementaries, junior highs, high schools, the CVTC and the university. I think the town heard some interesting information on all of the planning that's going on. It seemed, even though there was a lot of questions unanswered, it was assured that there is a lot of planning going on and there's a lot of knowledge about how to keep things safe should they continue to move forward. I've also, in that regard, attended 4 additional meetings since the last time this group met with the Dunn County Community Recovery Team. Also talking, focused a lot on return to school issues. I mentioned the WISI sessions. The Workforce Development Steering Committee has been meeting. I wrote a couple of support letters for a new facade grant that came out. A couple places in town interested in that. I wish there was more. And continue to work on the budget that's going to come up a little later. We canceled the annual meeting. We all knew that. I had put out there that I have a possibility of getting putting together a seminar with the rural broadband director from the state and asking around, asking people if they'd be interested in such a thing. There just didn't seem to be a lot of interest out there. People, I heard a lot of, wow, I'm really zoomed out. Don't think I could handle another unrequired Zoom. So I've got that on a back burner, or that might be ambitious to say it's even on a back burner, but. And then the other thing I do is lots of contacts with business people out there. Still talking to get some contacts from the from the Bloomer telephone people on rural broadband. That facade grant that I mentioned is new. There were loans out there before. There's a new grant program out there. Was able to visit some commercial sites in Knapp, as well as look at a lot that I got a call about in Wheeler that appears to be ready to put something on. I've got to get back in touch with the Wheeler folks, see where they're at about that. Just last week, took a trip up to northern Dunn County, talked to people in Ridgeland. It was amazing to hear how fortunate they feel having that new Dollar General that went in up there. It was just fun to hear. And then also stopped in, kind of related to economic things, but also rural tourism at the new Wynwood Park, north off of 170 on N. If anybody's heard of that, it's the old Deep Woods. And we talked to, Jim and I were up there and we talked to the people that are putting that back together. Jim, you might want to comment when I'm done here. Still lots of questions on who's digging where. You all know about the Marquardt. ELH is putting up another building in the industrial park. Right next to them is some more digging going on, and that's going to be a steel firm called Brown Strauss. And they're actually even going to have a rail spur there, which is going to be neat to see. Lots of contacts about sites and spaces and opportunities. Was able to meet with Dolly Caitlin about the with the Dunn County Transit and go over the grant program that kind of been delayed for now with employers not needing the service right now the way it seems. Working with an entrepreneur on a grant application. I was able to meet with Charlie Walker from Chippewa County Economic Development Corp. Get some ideas from him. A couple of meetings with a couple of different developers, and another one coming up related to the economy is kind of good news that since the high in April of 14.7 for the unemployment rate, it's down to 10.2. That's encouraging. The Farm Support Payments Program reopened just today, making another round of funding available for farmers that didn't get in on the first round. And the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission tapped some federal funds to create a loan program. I believe that's in the amount of $500,000 for our seven county area up here. So that's pretty much what I have.
Yeah, Stacy, thank you. A good thorough report. He mentioned that I went with Stacy up to visit the old depot that you all know it by ski. They said that they will have trails and for the winter already, but no downhill skiing this winter, but next year. And so we're bringing downhill skiing and cross-country skiing and summer races. It could be cross-country teams back to Dunn County. And I think that's pretty awesome to get that going again. And they got a beautiful sleigh already built there. And we just stopped to let them know how much we appreciate what they're doing. And then Stacy, you mentioned there's something up in Connorsville. We might catch that northwest corner of the county.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that. It's called Back Road Safari, just outside of Connorsville. And I've got a plan to go up there and see those folks, and another rural tourism possibility up there. And I don't know what their status is. I know that they had advertised that they were opening, and I don't know if that has changed. That was probably about a month ago. And I don't know if that's changed since the spike or new rules, but I'm going to find out soon.
I think I can go so far as to say if any member of this committee, and I'm going to mention it to the Dunn County EDC too, that would like to take half a day or some time to go out and travel throughout their part of Dunn County with Stacy, I think you'll find it very eye-opening and rewarding. We got to get up in these far corners, and Dave Bartlett, we're going to be up there in Sheridan and New Haven probably next week. So you might want to give us some other ideas of places that you think we ought to visit. And that goes for all over. Stacy, thank you for that good report. Now, let's move right on down. You want to start going into the budget that, again, I don't know if people have the hard report. I got it right in front of me, Stacy, but can you kind of go through this? And then I'm going to invite Paul. Paul and I had quite a discussion on that this morning, which I appreciated. And there are some things in here too later on that I've looked at too, and I will be asking you too, Stacy. I had did some input with Stacy on this budget. So it was with my approval, I want you to know, that he sent this out to you. And I thought, you know, again, I don't know how you can do your homework without having a hard copy in front of you. So Stacy hit some of these proposals, if you will, on the budget, and the bottom line, it didn't quite balance, and you might explain that too. But I'm going to turn it back to you on the budget now. Then, and Paul and Keith, and if any of you others want to interrupt anytime, please feel free to do so regarding this budget. And I know, Paul, you have a lot of questions. Go ahead, Stacy.
Okay, well, a little background. This draft that you see left my desk and went to Jim. The reason it doesn't balance is it's about my third draft. I wasn't done with it yet. So anyway, there's three main funding sources for the EDC. For those of you that don't know, there's a piece that comes from the county, a piece that comes from the city of Menominee, and then there's a piece that is somewhere between called fundraised and an investment made by a whole bunch of a couple of pages worth of businesses in town that invest in economic development. That's about another $40,000, about a
45.
fourth of our budget. So yeah. So anyway, this was just the first draft, and if for those of you that have it in front of you, you see very few numbers that changed. If you have it in red, the main numbers that changed is taking your two greatest expenses, that's your executive director and the administrative associate there. And because of what I've seen over the last 120 days of working here and learning about this job, is that I think that historically the executive director has been underpaid. And I also learned that I think the administrative secretary works about maybe 75% of her time for this corporation and another 25% for others. And it's possible, I think, in the future that if we were within the EDC to make the changes I've proposed here, and that's taking 25% of the money from the administrative secretary and putting it toward the CEO, toward the executive director, to raise that so that you can get the quality of person that you need to get to run an economic development corporation. Now,
Which
full
is
dis-
75, excuse me, Stacy. That
Yeah.
amount, he only has in at 75,000 right now, if you want to see it. And with the idea that we would have to be able to commit maybe and looking at raising that by quite 5,000 maybe every year. So the future, I asked you on a letter, remember, to be not just looking at this year, but the future, next year and the next year and the next year with Dunn County EDC. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Stacy. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
let me give full disclosure on that, just for those of you that are sitting there wondering and perhaps eyebrows are going up. I'm not going to be here past December 31st. So that means two things. This isn't going to be my budget for next year. This is going to be your budget, whatever gets approved. That is not my salary line item. I won't be here. Again, that comes from my analysis that this is a real job. This is a big job. And so I'm proposing those changes in about the third draft of my budget that I'm not done with yet. But that's the main changes. I have not, the ask for the investors goes out this fall. I didn't propose any changes in those numbers in terms of income. I might, to balance that budget, and try to propose that I might bring in another $1,900 to balance the budget. Other than that, you'll see most line items from last year have not changed. The big ones that did were in the, again, the salary, and then the associated taxes and unemployment, work comp, little numbers there. And then nothing huge on the revenue side there either, with the exception of looking for additional revenue from the county, looking for additional revenue from the city. A lot of that is based on that the main change in the expenses, to jump back and forth, is that we used to not pay rent, and next year will be your first full year of having to pay rent. So you see $1, I'm not sure why $1 was ever in there for rent, but it goes up to $6,220. So we'd be looking for an increase anyway. So it's a very basic standard budget with not a lot of changes, but some tweaks.
You know, again, Keith, you didn't get this hard copy either, huh? So here we're asking, you know, and again, I don't know how I can ask you to agree on a budget when for some reason I didn't know you didn't get it.
Well, pardon me, Chair Anderson, this
Yes.
also hasn't been seen by the EDC board.
No.
Just to disclose that.
And that's a good, thank you. And Paul and I, on our discussion this morning, we're talking about this a little bit. And I said, we don't have a meeting until a week from Wednesday to take it to my EDC board. And I know we're running late, Keith and Paul and Dave. What can we do right now so I get my own EDC board to get it approved? Otherwise, I'm putting the cart ahead of the horse, asking you to approve it before our own county, our own committee EDC. So, Paul, what say ye?
A lot of the same things you and I talked about, Chairman Anderson, today. One thing that I think is important for this committee to remember is Dunn County is a member of the Dunn County EDC. Dunn County is not the EDC. There are other partners. The cities, Menominee, Boyceville, Colfax, Elk Mound, and businesses. But the lion's share traditionally of the funding for the Dunn County EDC has come from the county. With respect to the timing of it, you're right, it's a bit of a quandary. Ideally, and I know that we've been in anything but ideal circumstances with the passing of Eric Turner. Ideally, the EDC itself develops a budget and then goes to each of its members requesting the contributions necessary to realize the revenues for that budget. Here we're in a situation where we've got a draft budget, but it's not been finalized. We can look internally. Keith Stry and I can look internally at our budget calendar. There's a possibility that there's an opportunity for one last input from this committee if it's deemed necessary. But if it's not, if for some reason we don't find time, then really the only opportunity for this committee to weigh in is right now, regardless of the budget not having officially been vetted by the EDC board. So I would encourage you go ahead and have that discussion, make that recommendation based on your best available information.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Keith and Dave Bartlett, I certainly want you to feel free to enter, and anybody else. But let me highlight just a few things that Stacy was talking about. You might want to, as a committee, wonder about, because later we have $5,000 in here in county tourism. Now I throw that up with you, Jim. That's under Dunn County EDC. Would we want, if we stay with Dunn County, do we want them to be in charge of rural tourism or not? That could save $5,000. We have broadband. We have money in here for things that we probably can go some other place. Remember later on the budget when we talked about Colson, my question again was, how much time and effort should Dunn County EDC be spending on rural tourism? It's important. That's what Stacy and I were doing a little bit last week. That's why we got $5,000 in there. So if you don't mind, we'll make sure Stacy and I get this to you, Keith, and you, Dave, and you, Dave Bartlett, and the rest of your committee members before our Dunn County EDC meeting. We will get all their input and then a motion from Dunn County EDC as to passing a budget. And I will immediately get that back to Paul and Keith and our county board chair. I'm sorry, this has been a hell of a mess, excuse my French. Trying to meet at Zoom and trying to do all these meetings with everybody. And Stacy's doing a great job out there doing all this. And I don't know when I started requesting a budget from him, but he hasn't had much time to do it. So if you want to fault anybody, it's me. I should have gotten it to you earlier. But there it is.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask, the CR&T has already made a recommendation on funding for its contribution to the EDC in the amount of $70,000. Does the draft budget in front of you change that?
Good question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Because if we look at this, the request that we have for Dunn County and looking at all of these, and I'm going to read it off to you. Okay. Boyceville, they only pay $1,880. They've been paying that for 4 years and no more. We're going to hit them up for more. Colfax, $2,000. They've been paying that since 2018. We're going to hit them up for more, but that's in the budget. Elk Mound, $1,435. They haven't been paying any more since 2018. 0 from Knapp, 0 from Ridgeland, 0 from Wheeler, 0 from O'Galley. Now, do they want to be part of Dunn County Economic Development? That's what Stacy and I are out there trying to talk to these communities about. That's what we're trying to do. And if they don't want to step up, okay, then we can turn around and say, do you really want Dunn County Economic Development? And then finally, we have in here for City of Menominee raising that to $30,000 proposal. They've been paying $26,445. And last year we paid $66,422. And we're proposing, if we're going to balance the budget, with the rent that Stacy talks about, it would have to add that 6,000, so it'd be $78,000. That's the proposal. You can change it back to 70, you can change it whatever you want, but that's our latest proposal to you, which in total income then is $171,815. That's 45,000 we're going to go out and fundraise from other people. And that's $4,800 coming from an annual meeting. We didn't have that this year. Now we're paying Stacy $1,200 a week. That's a lot less than we would have been paying Eric. Not a lot, but it's a lot less. And we didn't pay anybody for the first 3 months, remember, January, February, and March. And now Stacy said, and he's done, and we agreed when we hired him, he's an interim. He will be done at December 31st. I will no longer be the president. Gary Steen will be. So we're trying to give you a budget to keep Dunn County EDC going for the next year without a whole lot of money and without much time. And so I'm asking you right now as a committee, and Keith, and you, Paul, and you, Dave, are you willing to wait for us to have the Dunn County EDC meeting and then get it back to you? Or do you want us to take up the 78,000 or the 70 right now today that we're requesting done? Is that all you care about? How much are we asking for Dunn County? And if you answer that, we do have 70,000 in there right now that we talked about. But because of what Stacy said, we raised that to 78,000 because of rent. Tom Quinn has his hand up. Tom.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, the budget, the 171,815, does that include the funds for broadband and rural tourism?
No, this is income. This is income, that
That's income, okay.
171,000.
But
That
the
was
expenses-
income.
the
Expenses, I'm sorry, Tom,
Well, the expenses are in that range.
173,880.
Does that include the allocation for broadband?
No, it does not. It includes 5,000 for rural tourism. It does not include any money. Isn't that right, Stacy? Nothing for broadband.
Okay.
That was going to come through this committee for broadband.
That was separate. Remember, that was a matching, matching grant.
It's just hard to keep straight. For
Yeah,
some
that
reason.
wasn't-
The
That
committee also already recommended on that,
Right,
the
Yes.
amount of $15,000,
correct.
which at this point in the county's budget, we were looking at allocating to the ENS department as a holding spot.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Paul. Now, again, there's a lot of other income coming in other places that we, sponsorships and other things. So it isn't just membership. So the new executive director next year is going to have to be busy getting out there, raising this money from other manufacturers, industry, people that want to be a member of the Dunn County EDC. If they don't want to be a member, we won't have a Dunn County EDC.
If I may, Mr. Chair, that was actually one of my questions regarding this budget. The traditional Economic Development Corporation is a partnership between local government and local business. And contributions to the operation of that corporation typically involve a considerable percentage coming from businesses rather than the bulk coming from local government, because it is in the interest of the business community, economic development. Economic development, of course, primarily being in the form of new business attraction, existing business expansion, and existing business retention. So it's in the interest of the business community, the local business community, that there be a robust and effective economic development effort. So what percentage of the anticipated revenues for the 21 budget are coming from non-governmental sources?
Stacey?
For 2021, that'd be about 25%.
So I would recommend for
45,
consideration of this committee that is low. That's considerably low, given your typical model for Economic Development Corporation, a partnership between business, community, and local governments. That's one observation. The second observation is something that I have mentioned to Chairman Anderson, something that I have mentioned to County Board Chair Bartlett. In the time that I have been here, I have been hearing from several sources that the county does not seem to be realizing a lot of benefit from its economic development efforts. We have continued to be the largest contributor by far, more than double the next largest one, the city of Menominee. And yet we've, as some characterize it, perhaps it's unfair, but as some characterize it, we've seen little return for our investment. I had it put to me that if this were an actual investment, as we would do with a stock, that a financial planner would tell us to sell this stock because we're not getting the return. It seems to me, after I've given considerable thought to this, that part of what this committee should consider is whether or not doing more of the same, that is a model where we put our economic development resources, our financial resources into the EDC, if it makes sense to do the same thing again by seeking an executive director, or if it makes sense to do something different, to try something different. This seems to have been the conclusion of the Greater Menominee Development Corporation, who is contracting with a local firm to allow the consulting firm to provide those economic development services pursuant to a defined contract, which specifies specific activities and reports, annual reports and annual activities as well, but also outreach and participation in marketing events in the cities, et cetera, as a way of trying to take a different approach to economic development in the Greater Menominee area. The county, I think, needs to give serious consideration as to whether or not it makes sense to perhaps do something similar. Economic development is exceedingly important for the county as a whole. And in no way am I advocating that we don't devote resources to that. I think it's essential. But it may be time, after what some characterize as many years of comparatively little to show for the money we've invested, if it might be time to try a different model along the lines perhaps of what the Greater Menominee Development Corporation is doing, reaching out to a firm that can provide specific economic development activities and services rather than seeking an executive director. I also don't know, I'm not clear now. I had been given to understand from our conversation this morning, Chairman Anderson, that perhaps we were looking at a salary for an executive director on the order of $75,000 base salary. That's exclusive of benefits. I can tell you in the years that I've worked with economic development, which is a profession, Mr. Wickfield is absolutely right. It is a full-time job, and it's not just a full-time job you pluck somebody off the street to do. It takes expertise, it takes knowledge, and it takes skills. So it is a profession like any other. I'm skeptical that we would be able to find somebody to work full-time or part-time, in fact, for $75,000 that will give us the kind of benefits, the kind of bang for our buck, if you want, that we need, that we're looking for. Now, that isn't to say we can't. Perhaps we find somebody new to the profession who's starting out, or we find somebody on closing out their career who's looking to scale back. But rather than spend $78,000 on a model which, again, by some estimation has not been effective for the past several years, I would suggest this committee consider spending less money, perhaps, partnering with the Greater Menominee Development Corporation, perhaps to expand the scope of services that its consultant is going to provide, perhaps to include more of Dunn County than simply Greater Menominee, or even to take the position of take a year participating with the Menominee Development Corp and see if that model is effective or not and could lend itself to something going forward. Final observation, the rent for the EDC, I find it interesting. I mean, they are there in the city hall, Menominee, who's a partner. The reason that the EDC paid $1 in rent previously is because it was the county's building. And so it didn't make sense to make a contribution and then get the money back in the way of rent. So we kept it at $1. It was considered in kind. I don't know why the city isn't doing the same thing. I don't know if Chairman Anderson, you or Mr. Wickfield, you have talked with the city about its willingness to step up anymore. My last conversation with Lowell Prangy, the city administrator, was it had indicated a willingness to perhaps continue with the amount of contribution it had done in the past, but the city seems to be on board with the idea of partnering more with the Greater Menominee Development Corporation and its model. So I don't know about the success in either A, getting them to increase the amount of contribution from Menominee, or B, getting them to consider an in-kind on the rent so that 6,000 plus isn't going to be on your books. That's a few observations, and I know I'm being candid and I'm being blunt, and I mean to cast no dispersions on anybody prior, but we've got to bear in mind we are in a very tough fiscal environment at the county. We are facing, after the first draft, the first ask from our various departments, a $1.1 million deficit that we have to try to figure out somehow to plug. And we've got to make the best and most efficient use of our limited and in some cases dwindling resources, including financial, to try to achieve our ends. I'm simply suggesting this committee may want to consider whether or not this is money well spent, or if it's time to look for alternative models.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I want to hear from the rest of the committee members. Let's hear from any of you committee members.
Can I
And
ask, I'm a little unclear. So who is contributing to this Greater Menominee economic development?
That is largely the businesses, many of the businesses in the Greater Menominee area, along with the county, we pay our dues, and the city. Stout is involved. CDTC is involved. It's an economic development corporation that, rather than being countywide, is focused on Menominee and Greater Menominee. Same kind of model.
And so who approves that amount?
Well, we simply pay our dues as partners, as memberships. It's a membership fee as opposed to an annual ask for some larger amount. I think it's fairly nominal, Keith. I don't know if you remember off the top of your head, but I'm thinking it's somewhere on the order of $1,200 or something like that.
Somewhere in that ballpark.
you know, Stacy, how much we pay them?
How much we pay them?
Yeah, Greater Menominee Development Corporation. That's the question, isn't it, Ann?
There's nothing comes through the EDC budget that goes to GMDC.
No.
Because EDC in the past several years has been providing staffing services to the Greater Menominee Development Corp. But essentially, Supervisor Vogel, the two corporations overlap. Very similar interests. They're differentiated by different scale and by funding source, different scope in terms of area and by funding source.
And could the city of Menominee decide that they didn't want to contribute their portion to our Dunn County?
Any of the members of the Dunn County EDC could make that decision on any given year.
Yeah. Now, Ann, that's a great question. I have met with Greater Menominee Development Corporation starting way back in April. Would go to their meetings and I would hear, and quite frankly, their idea was we got to go out and hire $120,000 a year that Dunn County EDC does, or we won't have anybody good. And I just said, we don't have the money. We don't have that kind of money. So forget that. However, can we work closer together? And Paul is right. But remember this, they're only focused and worried about what is called the city of Menominee and that little area, right? That's all they care about. And they could care less about anything else. Broadband, and you throw that in front of them, and oh my God. Or you throw rural tourism up, oh my God, no. It's only the city of Menominee. And they made that very clear to me. And we talked about ways to merge. We talked about ways, how can we work closer together? Been through that discussion many times. I'm ready to go back now again and talk to them again, but I wanted to hear from all of you first. And Paul, you know, there's a lot of options on the table, and it's late. And then how do you get a chance to meet? You can't meet face to face anymore. So we're between a rock and a hard place right now in a short time. And thank you for that good question.
Can I ask another?
Yes.
Please. So if places, or if Menominee said we're not going to put in our share, or we're going to reduce our share, would the county or would the money need to be made up somewhere? More fundraising, or how would that work? So if we hired someone and it didn't quite
Best answer,
work out.
Supervisor Vogel, I think the best answer I can give you is that would be up to the EDC.
Hey.
We're only a member. We are the biggest contributor, but the Economic Development Corporation will have to decide what to do with the commitments, the financial commitments it gets from its members.
Correct. Exactly. And it might mean laying off somebody. It might mean big cutbacks. You're right. Good question, Ann.
Okay, thank you.
Let me hear from anybody else on a committee right now. Tom or Jim Zons or Larry. What do you think? Well, any comments here? Or Dave Bartlett?
Jim.
Yeah, Tom.
I was want other people to speak first but I do have a few thoughts. I mean, I think that from my experience, it's a little bit unusual for a county of our size to have two economic development entities. Usually there's one that serves both the whole county, but with the focus on the largest city usually. But I think that's the way Barron County, for example, operates, and Chippewa the same. But it does seem like it makes sense for us to be, before we decide to move forward with a full executive director position, to have the EDC take a look at some options. I think the argument that even if we go ahead with the budget as presented, it may very well be setting ourselves up for failure because it'll be inadequate to really do the job that we need to have done. And maybe there is an argument, as Paul mentioned earlier, that we should look for a way to sort of see this as a time to consider a transition or reconsider the structure. But what I wonder about is what the process, what the most sensible process for discussing and planning that would be. And it seems to me like it's too early for us to make a decision, that we have to go back to the EDC and say, well, these are our thoughts. We'd like you to consider some kind of a revised structure along the lines of what Mr. Miller described. And if that's the case, then it seems like it would be possible for us to defer a recommendation on a budget for a while, to give them time to do at least the initial action on that. That would be my feeling.
Thank you, Tom. Jim or Larry, either one of you, any comments?
Yeah, Jim, I can't raise my arm, but can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Larry.
Well, I'll just give you an example of what I observed this week. And I was in Ridgeland, and the co-op there had bought the tractor dealership just up the road on highway, used to be the Link Implement. So they have moved out of their downtown facility, which includes a full block along the highway. So you've got a building there with sewer and water, and shop and offices that sits empty. Now, it would seem to me that the people that live and work around Ridgeland, Wisconsin, or go through there on Highway 25, Dunn County ought to be involved in at least stocking this Synergy Co-op. And how do you merchandise a facility that you have moved out of? I mean, it would be for everybody's best benefit that building is being used, and the co-op has moved on to another building, and this sits empty, right in the middle of town. Well, there is a fair amount of traffic that goes through Highway, 25. But, I think Dunn County has an obligation to Ridgeland to see to it that at least if Synergy needs help, we should be able to help them fill that facility.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Haven't heard from you yet, Jim Zons.
My only thoughts are I think you've mentioned it a couple of times, Chairman, that this is coming really late in the process to be having this discussion about changing the structures. I think that Mr. Miller brings up some really good points. It's too bad we weren't having this conversation back in perhaps January and had some more time to work on it. I don't know that we have a lot of time to be considering the budget and then potential changes into the whole EDC structure and pushing it back to the board. So I'm just kind of in a quandary as to what to do at this point. So that's kind of my observations right now.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that from all of you. And I'm not being defensive when I say this to you. Don't get me wrong. But I'm saying when I became president in the middle of January, we'd gone a whole year with an ineffective executive because he was ill. And through no fault, we kept him on. And I'm not blaming anybody there. And then our assistant secretary there started doing things that was beyond her, quite frankly, her role and her job description, and other things weren't being done. That's the truth. So when I started watching these things for a while, and my God, what do you do? And so then the executive board gave me permission to hire an interim. That was April 1st. Then we started being able, through Stacy's work of trying to clean up and do all this back work. Yeah, we did not have anything good going on in 2019. You are absolutely right. So if we're going to measure what we want to do right now in the future as to 2019, then we might as well close it up. We had a bad year. That's the reason. Even the year before, Eric was quite sick, but he tried to stay working. Again, I'm not faulting Eric. He was sick. We kept him on and payrolled through the end of 2019. He passed away December 17th. That's the background. Now, we can go back and say all we want to about everything done wrong. And I'll accept my share, because then all of a sudden Stacy and I started trying to go to work in April. And all I can say is that trying to go out there and make these visits and doing everything we can, and now trying to find out, and if you want to say close it up, Stacy and I are both going to be gone January 1st. Now I'm being honest. And if that's what happens, I'm not upset. If you will give us a little more time to try to say what you want in the future, Stacy and I will work with you on that. So will the Dunn County EDC. Or if you say, nope, let it Greater Menominee Development and simply worry about the city of Menominee and forget these other areas, that's what will happen. Now, I expressed my opinion to you, but I'm not upset. Don't get me wrong. And what you decide to do as a committee, I will be supporting Dunn County Economic Development budget to continue. I'm only one, and I respect what your decision is, totally respect it. So does Stacy, I know that, we've talked about it. And so I'm saying to you, you want to give us a little more time? You want to approve $70,000, or do you want to not take any action? Not taking any action means that there won't be any budget, right, Keith?
No, I can provide some clarification on that, Chairman Anderson. This committee has already recommended $70,000 as a contribution to the EDC. What's before you tonight is whether or not you want to change that recommendation to $78,000 per the draft budget that's been talked about tonight,
Correct.
or not.
Thank you.
If you,
Thank you. That is
if that
correct.
doesn't happen, the recommendation of $70,000 remains. It's not on this committee to help the EDC necessarily, although I'm sure the help would be appreciated. Figure out what it wants to be when it, in the future.
Right. Sure.
It's not up to this committee to decide what the Dunn County EDC will be in the future.
Correct.
We're only one member.
Right.
So it's relatively simple, despite the complexity of what we're facing with economic development, the issue in front of the CR&T tonight. Do we maintain the 70,000 recommendation that's already been in place, or do we amend it to 78,000 per the request tonight?
Thank you for that clarification, Paul. I appreciate that. So you've heard it. If we don't take any action, it stays at 70. The recommendation that you got was at 78, and that, as I said, was kind of taking care of the rent a little bit. So no action unless I hear a motion from somebody to change
Chairman
it to
Bartlett has his
70.
hand up.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chairman Bartlett.
First off, Ann might have had her hand up before me. If she has something to say, she should go first.
Okay, thank you, Paul or Dave. Ann.
I just had one other question. So if we keep the 70,000 contribution to the EDC, and the EDC decides to merge with the greater Menominee using that money, is that all kosher? And that can happen?
Well,
that would be a decision on the EDC board.
Yes, I was going to say our board will be reckoning and talking about that at our next meeting, right, Stacy? Yes, but good question, Ann. I appreciate that question. We will certainly be doing that. So right now, I don't hear a motion or anything to amend it from 70,000, and I'm not necessarily asking for one. I'm saying you got presented a 78,000, changing it from 70. And unless
Chairman Bartlett has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Back to you. Right, Dave.
Yeah. My thinking on this is deciding to add $8,000 to the budget right now. I think it should come before the EDC board first, and they tell us that they would like $8,000 more, and for what reasons. I think that's the way it should work. It seems like that's the way it should work to me anyway. If I don't know, it just seems like if we approve $8,000 now, we're giving them money that they haven't asked for, and I don't think that's. I realize that you being the chair and having Stacy here, that's probably the way it's going to go. But the board should weigh in on it, and so I think we're putting the cart before the horse here at making a decision on this $8,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Another comment on Paul's idea. I sat in on one meeting with the Greater Menominee Development Corporation, and my feeling from that meeting is they're probably not willing to work with the Dunn County Economic Development Corporation at this time. If we went with with Paul's recommendation, and I'm just throwing that out there, showing them that we're willing to work with them, or I guess now I'm talking about Dunn County, not the Economic Development Corporation. I'm talking about the county itself with our money. If we decided that we would participate in what they're doing, that may, in the future, that may help to come up with one economic development corporation for Dunn County. And hopefully with the county's best interests in mind, it would be for the whole county. It may be just for the whole county of who's ever members of that corporate economic development corporation, such as Boyceville, Colfax, Elk Mound. It might, you know, maybe Ridgeland would be included or not. Like Larry said, they should be included. I totally agree. But evidently Ridgeland decided that they didn't want to be included, or they would belong to that economic development corporation. I know the building well that Larry's talking about. It'd be nice if another business moved in there. But the bottom line is they decided not to belong, and I have no idea why or whatever. But I'm just throwing that out there, that if we did that, it might help in the future to end up with one economic development corporation in Dunn County, whatever you want to call it.
Thank you, Chairman Bartlett. And I will say to Stacy at this point, you and I should probably consider at our next Dunn County EDC meeting that I would like to hear those comments that our chairman just made, maybe to our board. And if or from Paul or Keith, but so our regular, the rest of our board, and we have 17 members on our Dunn County Economic Development Board representing all of the areas around this, the county, and business appointed, some of them by Chairman Bartlett, and some are appointed represent their city or their village or their community, and some at large. So if you will, at this particular point, Chairman Bartlett, I really appreciate your comments. We've been belaboring this issue for a long time, and I don't think maybe we're ready to take any more action. 70,000 is on the table right now. I will be inviting you, Chairman Bartlett, to come to our next EDC meeting. So Stacy Wigfield, if you would remember to maybe invite Chairman Bartlett to be a part of our program, we will then discuss it further with our board. Now, unless there are other board members, committee members that really want to strike up a point here, when I'm looking at the clock, it's 6:20. Larry, you have your hand up.
Jim, I would certainly like to see your board talk about this rental agreement and what it might cost or might not cost if it's combined. When we had the dollar value moving from Wilson Street to Highway 12, you know, this is just one of those costs that was not included. And if the city of Menominee is going to be a major player in economic development, you know, maybe they better be looking at that rental agreement being a little more equitable, has it been in the past. So I'd just like to have the rental looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. That's a great point. Now, unless there's any other committee member that wants to say anything, we're going to move on. And right now, no action is taken, so it stays at $70,000. And that will, unless I hear from any other committee members or questions from Keith or Paul or Dave, we're moving on. Thank you. And Stacy, thank you for the report. And I really appreciate this discussion. I wish we'd have had it months ago. I agree with you. We will keep you informed and move on. Moving on the agenda, it's getting late. Now Bob Colson, thank you for your patience, Bob. So if you're there, Bob, I'd like to have you update us on Broadband Forward. If there's anything new happening right now regarding broadband in Dunn County. Bob, are you there?
I am here, Chairman. Thank you. Not really a heck of a lot to add to Broadband Forward. We are certified. I am going to the Highway Department this Wednesday to their meeting along with Chairman Bartlett to discuss Bloomer Telephone and their request for to be considered their fees to be considered part of Broadband Forward. But otherwise, there isn't anything new. I'm just updating that committee as to that we are Broadband Forward and moving on. So I really don't have a heck of a lot, Mr. Chair.
Well, Bob, thank you. And I know I saw the paperwork going into this, and I do know that it takes a long time. And I might say this, that from the time when, and Chairman Bartlett reminded us at a meeting that yes, this committee, and we had agreed to that with Highway and your committee, Tom Quinn, PR&D, and this committee, that we needed to apply for broadband certificate broadband forward, and we did. So now the question is just when is it official? And we hope that we can satisfy Bloomer now by they applied thinking that we were broadband forward certified, and we had applied, and we had already gone through the formalities. So I hope that can be worked out satisfactory. I think we'll buy a lot of good public relations. I did talk to 24/7. I stay in contact. They said, don't worry, we won't apply for the grants because they got 2 big ones coming up. So that won't be a problem anymore. So it's going to save them about, if that happens, about what, $1,900? Is that right, Bob?
I believe so, somewhere around there. I mean, I'd have to go back and pull the exact amount up,
Right.
but
But it doesn't matter. But it's quite a significant saving. And Stacy, I know that you heard people contacting your office and everything, and we're all in this trying to keep everybody of our providers out there happy, because we're happy that they're coming into Dunn County. And so anything you can do to help that out with Bloomer, we would appreciate it. Meanwhile, we're still working with everybody else throughout the county on broadband. Bob, thank you for your hard work and keeping us informed on that.
yeah.
Moving along.
One final note, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yes, Bob.
Tomorrow at PR&D is our budget discussion for ENS, and I believe it was Mr. Miller who alluded that there's a placeholder for broadband, and it's actually in the planning division's budget. So that discussion for that money will happen tomorrow at PR&D.
Well, thank you. I guess I have to bring up the idea now. Then remember when I brought up the idea at last meeting about that we should submit $15,000 in our budget from here to be spread out for and my criteria. I think I listed it, and some of you wondered what it was. And without belaboring this point, I simply said that the contributions, if we would agree to 15,000, would go to anybody that got an awarded proposal, a grant awarded, and then it would be from the first come, first serve, and then we would match the townships up to say 5,000 first come, first serve. So if there are 3 townships, and the first 3 came along, that's where our 15,000 would go, to encourage townships to put money in toward anybody for a broadband grant. And these 9, we got about 9 of them out in the county, Bob. Isn't that right? That serve parts of Dunn County. And if any of them will apply for a grant, all of us were willing to supply our information, broadband forward certification, to encourage them to apply for a state. Most of them are state, some are federal. So they'll get that grant, and then we'll get more fiber throughout Dunn County. And if there's ever been a need, I'm going to say to you right now, if you read your last Wisconsin Counties magazine, there's a huge article all about broadband and COVID-18 in Wisconsin. And if you didn't read that, and we all know how important broadband is, but even more now than ever. And if we don't stay on top of this in Dunn County, we're not doing a job to our citizens. And I'm thinking $15,000, folks. We got a tight budget, but if we can't find $15,000 to help with broadband in rural Dunn County, then we better start scratching our heads and wondering what this is all about, because this is huge. Thank you. And end of my pitch on that. I know, I get going, and I'm trying to watch the clock. It's 6:30. And now I'm gonna, Bob, anything else?
No, and if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, if there's nothing else, then I will probably check out of the meeting.
You might. Thank you, Bob, for your time and patience with us. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, the last thing is legislative issues, and all I'm proposing to you is that we submit the same thing we did last year. And when I went back and looked at that, it was simply that we continue to support more funding for rural broadband. And that was our proposal, wasn't it, Keith? And we're looking at, and Paul, we're looking at maybe from this committee saying, yes, to our legislative issues, let's continue to support rural broadband funding at the state level. Anything else on that you care to bring up? Unless you want to know exactly what it was. It simply said, support increased funding for rural broadband expansion. Is that satisfactory with everybody? Or do you want to modify it?
Mr. Chair, I think you probably want a motion to recommend that.
Thank you, Julie, as always, keeping me on the spot. Legislative issue, we need some action.
If I may, Mr. Chair, is there any interest from this committee in advocating for any legislation related to rural tourism? Monies being devoted for instance, building a directory of rural tourism opportunities.
Oh, it's a great idea. Thank you, Paul. Why don't somebody amend this and add that? The motion is 15,000 for rural broadband.
No, that's two different things.
I'm sorry, it's two different
We're
things.
talking the legislative agenda.
I'm sorry. Yeah, here I am. It's getting late. We're talking legislative issues. So we'd like to add to it, besides rural broadband expansion, for rural tourism on a state level, right? I think it makes sense. Why not? Rural tourism.
How can we say that in the most effective way?
Support increased funding for rural broadband expansion and rural tourism. What would you suggest, Paul?
I think it should be a separate motion, Jim. It should be a motion to support.
All right, let's do them separately. Thank you.
Yeah.
And a motion for legislative support increased funding for rural broadband expansion. Tom, do you move?
I'll move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Jim?
Times, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion on it? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? It's unanimous, approved. Thank you. Now, let's talk about rural tourism. A motion would be in order then if you wanted to support some increased funding for rural tourism. Is that getting what you're getting at, Paul? Yeah. How about it? Anybody? This is only going to the legislator to support it. Tom?
Well, I mean, yes, I would say as a placeholder until we maybe can iron the language out a little bit, that we would support increased state funding to provide resources to local counties to support the expansion of rural tourism.
That sounds good. Is that a motion?
That's my motion. I'm second to it.
Who seconded it?
I'll second it.
Jim, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Julie, do you have that motion?
Let's see, to support for the legislator to provide.
Your mic's off, Julie.
Try it again, Julie.
Sorry about that. I had to.
Your mic's still off, Julie.
I can hear her. Can the rest of you
Because
hear
you're
her?
in the room with her, Chairman Anderson. I think she's not on the, I think
Must
you
be
got
mouse trouble here. There must be a mouse trouble here with my
There you
computer.
go.
but-
Now you're on, Julie.
It's for the legislators to provide resources for counties to expand rural tourism funding is what I had, if that's correct.
That make it, Tom and Jim?
I think that's good for now. Yeah.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Okay, we're gonna vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Thank you. I think that was a great addition. We're getting to the end of the agenda, believe it or not, and I look at the clock and it's 6:33. Whew. You've been patient. Here we are. Our next meeting date, by the way, now Julie, our next meeting date is September 14th. That's and then our county board meeting is 2 days later, September 16th, according to my schedule. And so by our next meeting, we will have our EDC meeting, and I will get back to you via email as to what's going on and everything, or any other way we can, Paul. I'll talk to you about that. Write down the agenda that I see right now. Announcements. Anybody have an announcement? The Wisconsin Counties Convention is canceled, as you all know, for September, right, Paul or Dave? Bartlett, canceled. So we won't be going to the Dells. Dave, any other announcements or anything from the county, that board you'd like to announce?
No, not at this time. I don't have anything.
Thank you for being here, Dave. We really appreciate it. And to
Tim,
Paul and to
I had
Keith.
just a request, Jim.
Tom.
If you could maybe send out that budget so that we could look at it, we appreciate it.
Yeah. Stacy, we will be sure to get that out to them, right? And Stacy, it wasn't your fault. It was, I don't know, I thought it got out. I took it and forward. Julie, anything else? No, she says.
The budget went into my spam folder, so you might want to check your spam folders.
Oh. It goes in, all my messages go in spam. I'm sorry. Okay, nothing more on announcements. Thank you all. I appreciate your attention and everything, your comments from everybody. And we will, an old saying I like right now, this too shall pass. We will get through this. Thank you all. Meeting's adjourned.
Thanks, Jim.
Night all.